Cynthia G, white supremacy, does it exist in your world? And has it affected black men?
Absolutely, it exists, and black men have worked in tandem with white supremacy since they've come in contact with it. And this is why I say, in the black community, we have very disingenuous, very dishonest discussions, especially when it's regarding black men, because we do have a black male worshiping culture. So what we do within that culture, and Umar Johnson is showing it today, is absolve black men from any accountability for what they've done. Number one, we wouldn't be in a system of white supremacy had it not been for black men. So if you want to go all the way back to history, then let's go back to history when black men were selling their own people into white supremacy. Let's go back into history when 16 years off the plantation, black men were worried about a war being waged on them. They were worried about getting access to white women. That's what you were worried about. And it's interesting. There's a reason why I feel like Umar focused mostly on me and Hope's attitudes, and it's because he can't accurately answer the question. He mentioned names, not accomplishments. And the reason being is because...
Well, I think he mentioned those names specifically because the accomplishments of those people don't have to be explained.
Right, but those accomplishments are also accomplishments that I've heard Umar Johnson speak negatively about, specifically the civil rights movement and how damaging it was to black people. But now he wants to sit here and say the very people who accomplished that were accomplishing something beneficial when, in his own opinion, that wasn't beneficial and did more harm to the community than good. So I think that because we're having such a dishonest discussion where black men don't want to take accountability for what they've done. They want to be the victims of society, but then they want submission from the women. The bottom line is I'm not willing to deflect from the fact that, number one, black men are the greatest non-white contributors to white supremacy. Let's just be real. White supremacy couldn't even exist without black men's compliance. They're always uplifting whiteness, biracial children, and trying to assimilate. And that's why I went back to the notion of the only time black men truly feel like there's a war against them is when they feel like they're being punished for something white men do. At the end of the day, y'all dropped the ball. You're blaming white supremacy on your failures. We already know there's oppression, but black women are double oppressed. We have more barriers to face. You have male privilege in a patriarchal system, and you can't even get it right?
Well, Dr. Umar, I think we all know your stance on interracial marriages.
Absolutely, but let me also
so please acknowledge what the rest of what Cynthia G has said.
Absolutely. I'm not sure where Sister Cynthia took history class, but if you know anything about the transatlantic slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade was a European enterprise.
I'm talking about the sub-Saharan. I'm talking about the sub-Saharan slave trade. You should go look into it.
Excuse me.
You addressed me.
May I finish?
Go look into the sub-Saharan slave trade where black men were trading their women and children for alcohol and tobacco.
I don't want a monologue. May I finish?
Go ahead, Dr. Umar.
The transatlantic slave trade was a European enterprise. It was not an African enterprise. Although there were some chiefs who participated in it, by no means did they control the direction and extension of the transatlantic slave trade. So that's number one. Number two, black men resisted enslavement, not only on the shores of Africa, but right here in America. We celebrate Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, Gabriel Prosser. There's literally hundreds of documented attempts by African men to liberate not only themselves, but their women and their children. So to act like we just sat there and were complicit in our own oppression is absolutely ridiculous. The other point I want to clarify for your information, Cynthia G, you never, ever heard me condemn the civil rights movement. The good Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is a hero of mine. And despite me being a Pan-African nationalist, I take issue with other black nationalists who do want to dismiss Dr. King's accomplishment. The civil rights movement was necessary because it removed a psychological scar that suggested of racial inferiority. So you've never heard me deride the civil rights movement. I support it, although I took certain issues with it. The bottom line is, when black women, black girls, black boys listen to this conversation we're having today, they're going to be confused because they hear two brothers speaking of a greater context of the problems that affect black men, and you hear two intelligent, beautiful black women who want to keep scapegoating black men while ignoring the historical and contemporary systemic challenges that are constantly placed in our way. I'm going to say this and be quiet, Sister Tammy. I got to give you this. There was a recent piece of research, Tammy, that came out. And the research said a black man with a master's degree, they did a study. They had white males who had come out of prison apply for jobs. They had black men with master's degrees, Sister Tammy, apply for the jobs. And guess what? The white males with prison history and no education were called back more than 75% of the time than black men with no prison history and a master's degree.
I'm aware of that. I am aware of that survey.
Women want to do to liberate themselves of the community. They can't do it without the men. It is not a competition. It should be a collaboration. But once again, some of us in the conversation are so filled with hatred for the opposite gender that we can never get around to talking about solutions. And in speaking of clips, Sister Tammy, there is one clip you might want to ask Sister Cynthia about, because it was sent to me by about 30 people several months ago, maybe even weeks, where she suggested that women, black women, should abort their black male fetuses because after birth they would not contribute to anything worthwhile in the black community. Could you ask her to clarify her comments?
I would love to.
I would love to too, but we don't have time.
Well, if anyone really wants to know about why selective breeding will be the best thing for our community, then they can come to my channel where I explain that, as I also talk about the dynamic between black men and black women, and black women's need to have standards, expectations, and boundaries when dealing especially with black men, but any man in general, and open up your options too. Put you first. Stop thinking about black men.
Okay. And I'm going to be thinking about my black man, Cynthia, because homie is all of that and then some. So I'm thinking right now. As a matter of fact, this show is over because I'm about to go think up on something.
I can't join you in that one.